Hello everybody, it's fantastic to have this recording for you. I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the UK. I live not far outside of London, in Surrey, near a place called Woking, in a lovely village called Byfleet. But right now, it is definitely bedtime and I would not be at my best if I was with you live. I really hope you're having a great day and you'll enjoy the rest of your day as well. I'm here to tell you all about the virtual classroom. In fact, the ins and outs of the virtual classroom. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Jo Cook. I'm really glad to be giving this presentation for you because I have focused on webinars and virtual classrooms since 2013. My company Lightbulb Moment, we focus on helping teams of people to design and deliver really great webinars and virtual classrooms. My background of learning and development, it includes further and higher education, the charity sector, and also really large companies like Bupa International Medical Insurance or CNN News, part of Cartoon Network, Time Warner you might have heard of, but also small businesses, which is what I run now. Lightbulb Moment, you can go and find us. We do all sorts of training. We've got a free community, we've got blogs, we've got resources, all sorts of stuff. But what I'd really like to focus on is our agenda. We're going to talk in this session about different types of session that you might run and really focus on engagement. Also, we're going to look a little bit about design because design, engagement and facilitation, they all go together really nicely. And lastly, talk about digital body language. Now, whilst I can't be there in person, it doesn't stop you using that chat window, having a discussion with each other, maybe agreeing with what I've said, maybe disagreeing, that's fine too. It's all about having the discussion and what can you learn from each other. As we go through, I'll ask questions. Please discuss that in the chat window amongst yourselves, also whilst I deliver and tell you more. So I really want to encourage you to have a good old natter, even though sadly I can't be with you. So what we're focusing on here, first of all, is this fabulous framework that we've got, all about the different capabilities and how we apply them, how we use them. And what I'm focusing on in my session is the execute and deliver dimension. It's all about the structured project communication. It's about stakeholders as well as learners and making sure we create the right environment to maximize learning. And that's a key point, that environment, because with webinars, with virtual classrooms, live online learning, and then if you expand that to e-learning and digital, well, actually what we've got here is something that is a little bit of a different environment from what people are used to traditionally. I need to start off, first of all, with some definitions. The difference between a webinar and a virtual classroom. So if I was with you in person right now, I'd get you to tell me what you think the difference is by typing in that chat window. There really is an important difference between these two definitions. Now you might also use other words. Instead of virtual classroom, you might use VILT, virtual instructor-led training. You might use live online learning or anything else that is relevant to you and your organisation. None of these are wrong definitions or wrong language. It's about what works in your organisation. If we're looking at a webinar, first of all, I would focus a little bit around what the software platform is, as well as the number of people. So I would say a webinar is anything more than 30 people. And you might be thinking, well, that's not very many people. And it's not, but you do get small webinars. Webinars can be obviously 300, 3,000 or more than that. It can be hundreds of thousands of people, but it starts as small as 30, and I'll come back to why that's important in a moment. It's also a little bit about the software platform. If you're using Zoom meeting, you've got breakout rooms, whiteboards, all sorts of different things. But if you're in Zoom webinar, it's a little bit cut back. There's not so much of the collaborative stuff that you can do. And then if you look at things like Webinar Ninja, for instance, that's a little bit more about kind of using that as a marketing, branding and sales tool. So this is why a webinar is quite a specific term. Now also, you've probably been on those webinars where maybe there's no chat window, which I absolutely hate and despise, or maybe it's just talked at you most of the time and there's no interaction. Maybe it's just pure sales, maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't. But not all webinars are like that. They can be engaging and fun and collaborative and learning experiences, and they're the ones that I focus on. So let's contrast a webinar to a virtual classroom, or VILT, or live online learning, whichever language you prefer to use. The way I define a virtual classroom is that it's much more about facilitating the training or the teaching. It's a real focus on performance, and it's also a small group of people. At Lightbulb Moment, we limit our virtual classroom sizes to 10 people, ideally 6 or 8, because you can really start to focus on the individuals, and I think that's really important. So then where do we kind of think about this in terms of, well, which method should I use for my live online learning intervention? So I'd say a webinar is absolutely great if you've got large groups of people, as I say, 30 plus. What you get here is a broad interaction. I call it like a broad brushstroke, because whilst you can absolutely use the chat window, use polls, use maybe whiteboards if you want to with 30, 50, 100, 200, 300, 400 people, it's not the same as getting to know individuals. You can respond to a group, which is brilliant, and it should be interactive. However, if you contrast that to a virtual classroom with maybe 10 people or 6 or 8, what you have with those very small groups is the individual facilitation. You can get to know individual people and their learning needs and really cater for those people with you. Obviously, it takes more time. You don't broadcast out to as many people, so it's not as cost effective. But then you get much better learning outcomes, hopefully, and therefore an increase in performance. So if we've got maybe up to 10, could stretch it to 12 for a virtual classroom, and 30 or more for a webinar, there's obviously a gap in between. That's what we call a large virtual classroom. You can have up to 30 people in a virtual classroom, and it still is a virtual classroom. It still is facilitated, it's still individual, it's still focused on the learning. However, we all know that the more people you add, the less individual attention people get. And it's not wrong. Again, it's no right or wrong. It's about what's the right solution for what you need to do. And then how do you design differently for 30 people versus 6? How do you facilitate differently for 30 people versus 6? And so it's those differences that you need to know about, because it's about what people need to do after a session. We all like to think that our training is amazing, and I am no different from that. And I'm sure your training is amazing, but we know it's part of the whole learning journey, the whole learning experience that people go on. And we need to ensure that our virtual classrooms, large virtual classrooms and webinars don't do this to our students and our attendees and our learners. We need to make sure that we bring them along with us and give them the really great experience that they deserve. So let's think about the great live online sessions you've been on. That could be a public webinar with hundreds of people. It could be a virtual classroom in your organisation with just a handful, or anything in between. Perhaps they've been challenging, and that's been really good to help you develop your skills or your thinking. Perhaps it's been really fun and you've just had a great time and really enjoyed yourself. It could be anything else. In other words, you found it useful. It's been great for your learning and for your development. It's impacted you some way and maybe updated something you think about or the way you behave, either personally or at work. Have a think about what made those live online sessions really great. What challenged you but didn't necessarily stress you? What made it fun but not cheesy? What made it engaging but not over the top? And have a think about what those things really are and what they mean to you, because they're the things that we need to think about planning and designing in our own sessions. There are all sorts of elements that can make a session live online great. And to be fair, if you look at these, you're going to think that actually most of them is about any training or teaching or facilitated learning session being great. First of all, obviously as a facilitator, we need to know our stuff. If we're constantly looking things up and not knowing the answer, there's going to be a credibility issue. You know, the honesty of, I don't know, I'll look it up and come back to you is fine, but doing that every single time, going to be a bit of a challenge. We need to be passionate. We've all been in those sessions where the person delivering it looked like it was the most boring topic in the world, that they didn't want to be there, and unfortunately that transfers really easily to us. So even if it's about something that could be perceived to be a boring or techie or challenging subject, your passion for the underlying elements, for the theme, for what it enables people to do, that will come across to people. When we're thinking about live online sessions, a webinar or virtual classroom, it needs to be designed that way. Probably we've all experienced in 2020 this lift and shift where people have taken their face-to-face training and for probably really good reasons had to get it live online, maybe in Zoom or Teams or Adobe Connect, whatever it might be, and they've had to do it really, really quickly in some very challenging circumstances. And I commend people that have been able to do that. That's absolutely awesome. What we have to make sure we do though is that, especially if we've got a little bit more time, and that could be a few hours, it doesn't have to be days and weeks, but also as we start thinking more strategically about doing more live online work, our sessions need to be designed to take advantage of the software that we have, the way that we're delivering differently. Maybe it's not a whole day anymore, and it probably shouldn't be. And we also have to make sure that as a facilitator, teacher or trainer, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, that actually we have to be great at the live online part of it. Being great face to face, that's awesome, and you can use those skills. But you also need to learn the live online part, and that's obviously where I try and help people. Because therefore the interaction and engagement is really different when you're focusing live online. What you do face to face when you ask questions, you can replicate, you do a version of, but it's different when you get live online. And we'll start talking about some of those things as we go through. And lastly, it's about the appropriate activities for live online. And that's the bit that I want to concentrate on a little bit more, because this is about getting people involved in the sessions. Because if you're not getting them involved in the live online session, if you're not asking them questions, responding to their learning needs, tailoring your delivery to what they're telling you and asking you, well, then you might as well make a video or do a handout, because that would be better use of people's time. Now, part of that capability framework is the manage learner engagement. And this is what I'm focusing on here for my session for you today. And it's got here details about the environment. And I've said already, the live online environment, it's different because we've got technology bringing us together. A lot of people see that as a barrier, quite frankly. There's me, there's the computer screen and the internet, and in the case of today, quite a few hours difference between us. Not only do we have maybe a geographical distance in terms of I'm in the UK and most of you are probably in Australia, but also what we have is a psychological distance, and we also have a technological distance as well. So we have to overcome all those things, and this is why it's important to design for this different environment. It's also still about monitoring learners and responding to learners, and I want to focus on ways that we can do that live online. Why is it just so important we get people involved in our topic, in our activities, in what's going on in a live online session, rather than just presenting information? As I said before, if you're not going to respond to people, well, then make a video, because somebody can watch it when they want to. They can watch it at 1.5 or 2 times speed if they kind of know what you're talking about and finding it a bit boring. They can pause it and look something up. It's much more useful to do a video or give a handout somebody can scan and read quickly if you're not going to get people involved. This research was about using interactive video in learning. So it's about video, not about live online learning, but I think it applies nicely to live online sessions as well. Especially when you consider that really poor quality webinars and really poor quality virtual classrooms, well, actually they're not much better than just watching a video anyway. And here the point is about interactivity, helping people to pay attention in the session, and therefore obviously making things more effective. I think this is really important because attention span, people are always saying, is waning. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the case across the board. We know people will say, oh, well, 3 seconds on YouTube is a lifetime, but somebody else will contrast that with binge watching Netflix. And it's not all the same. And you've probably had that discussion already. But either way, keeping people's attention for the right reason for their learning and their behaviour change and performance is what we're aiming for here. And this quote is all about making sure that it's about acquiring skills. It's about accelerating and helping that. And it's also about making sure that it's about what people do at work or whatever your organisation does. It's focusing on that behaviour change and that organisational need, or maybe societal need. All of this leads me to really focus on engagement, about doing things together, and about specifically how do we do that when we're live online. This piece of research is all about saying when people are active in their learning, it's about doing things. It's not just watching. It's not just listening. Taking notes is good, but it's not just about that. And there are all sorts of ways that we can get people interacting in live online sessions. It depends a little bit on the platform that you're using, about what specific things that you have. For instance, most platforms have maybe a green tick or check mark and a red cross or X for basically answering yes or no. Or it could be a thumbs up and thumbs down. Teams doesn't have this at the moment. So for example, we use the emojis and a smiley face or sad face for yes or no. It could be you only have the hands up icon, in which case you designate that as hand up yes or hand down no. It's entirely up to you how you want to use that. But using something like green tick if you've had experience of this is really, really valuable to people. Or it could be you're asking somebody to unmute and you want them to add more. And you can always say, well, just click the red X if for some reason you can't do that. It's no problem. It gives people a bit of an out and makes it okay to say no to you. And it's quick and easy to use. We can ask people in our virtual classrooms to unmute to tell us more. Now, often we have people muted to try and keep the background quiet and make it easy for everyone to listen. Not everybody does this, and it's not right all the time. Maybe you want open microphones for your 6 or 8 people and for everyone to have a bit of a discussion. And if they're all on webcam, that can be relatively easy to do. In other circumstances, that's not quite right. So it's up to you to sometimes say, hey, Bob, can you unmute and tell us a bit more about what you typed in the chat window, please? You can do things like using chat. Chat is my absolute favourite tool. If I go onto a webinar and there's no chat, or I'm incredulous. I just literally put it on my second screen. It's now talk radio. I'm not invested anymore. I think chat is amazing for interaction, even if it's not with the speaker, it's with other people that we're discussing the topic and learning from others. And that social learning is so valuable. It keeps me engaged in the topic. We can also do things like using the whiteboard and actually typing text on things, or maybe using a poll so we can get the idea of what's going on in a session. Chat, hold and send is a really nice one. Now this isn't a button you press, it's a methodology of using things together. So what you do is you pose a question and then you say, right, everybody type your answer in chat, but hold off. Do not send that response. So that's the chat and the hold bit. And then you use a version of, maybe that kind of green tick mark to say, right, everybody's ready to go, or hand up, or smiley face, whatever's appropriate in your platform. And then once everybody has that green tick, then you say, okay, hit that send button, and then all of your information will come through in the chat window. It's just a different way of getting people's attention. There's a subtle pressure that everyone has to answer. It's also really nice that you give people a bit of thinking time, a bit of kind of time to type, and then kind of sit back and consider. What's also really good about it is that you get people's opinions without it being influenced by what somebody else has written. And it's their own language. When we use a poll, you're giving your answer based on the options I've written for you and the way that I've written it and what I think. Whereas using chat, hold and send is a really lovely feature to get your language. So that's ask a question, type in chat, hold off sending, green tick when you're ready, everybody's got a green tick, all hit send, then you discuss from there. It's a really nice little feature. You can obviously get people to draw on the whiteboard. That doesn't have to be a traditional drawing. It could be lines between things. It could be circles around different things. You might want to get people to click that hand up icon to say, hey, I've got a question or a comment and I want to get involved somehow. Think back to some of the activities that you did either as a kid or maybe with your own kids. Those things like spot the difference, or you've got two lists of things and you have to link them together for the correct answer. Those kind of things can give you some inspiration for versions of that are appropriate for the platform and for your learning topic and your audience live online. And lastly, if your software has it, you might have a question pod or a question panel that's separate from chat. And that can be really useful too, to separate out in a busy session, especially maybe a larger virtual classroom or a webinar, the questions from the chit chat that's going on. So that can be a really nice one to use as well if you have it. So we know there are lots of different tools we can use in our live online platforms. Another factor to think about is how often we use them. If you think about designing your sessions and the questions, the activities and the interactions you want with your whole group, you have to think about, well, how often should that be? So think about this now in the session, perhaps type in chat, how often, how many minutes should you have an interaction with your group in your virtual classroom? So an interaction for me could be as quick as green tick if, or type a couple of words in the chat window, or use a stamp tool on the whiteboard or a poll. It doesn't have to be a 10-minute breakout, although it can be. That's more like an activity. An interaction is quick. So how many minutes minimum and maximum should we have between our interactions? Well, if you've read any books or any blogs on the matter, you will probably have come across this 3 to 5 minute rule. And if you popped in chat anywhere around kind of 2 to 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, that's absolutely in the ballpark. The whole idea here is that you are planning this in for your group every few minutes. Now, some people at this point might have put in 10 or 12 or 15 minutes and thought more about an activity like, oh, we're having a big discussion, or everybody's using the whiteboard and we're chatting about the answers. And that's absolutely great if that's the kind of thing you were thinking. But what you've got there is you've actually got several things you've layered together. So maybe what you've done is you said everybody put a stamp on the whiteboard to vote for something. And then your next thing was put Y in the chat window to tell us more. And then the next thing was, Bob, let's unmute you. And Bob, who do you want to hear from next? That's actually a series of interactions building up your activity, which is brilliant. When we're thinking about the 3 to 5 minute rule, the whole idea is if you've been talking for more than 5 minutes without your attendees doing something, it's too long. Now, it's really interesting here because some of you might be thinking, well, listening to you for more than 3 or 4 minutes without doing something would be painful. And others of you might be thinking, I couldn't do something every 4 or 5 minutes. I'd never get through all my material. So this can often be a huge discussion in its own right. And especially then, if I throw a huge spanner into the works, is if I tell you that in my sessions, when I'm running them live online as a virtual classroom, I average between 2 and 3 minutes for an interaction. So on average, about every 2.5 minutes, I'm saying green tick if this, or poll if that, or type in the chat window about X. And it's a really interesting bit of feedback. When I introduce this early on in my sessions and we talk about it, a lot of people will say, no, it's far too often. That would be too much. We couldn't possibly do it and get through all of our material. What I want you to consider here is this is about the feedback. It's not just about, I have to get them out of their email. I'd want to give them a green tick option just so I know they're still there. This is about me finding out, what do you think? What are you learning, so that we can have a conversation? It's how I get my feedback. It's how I get rapport. It's how I get energy. I often joke that it's coffee that gives me my energy. But really, well, maybe it is a bit of coffee, but really it's about this interaction from people and getting the energy from them. So bearing this in mind, how on earth do we start designing this way with all this interaction and focusing in a live online classroom? Well, it's focusing on what learners can do and say themselves rather than what I'm doing or saying. It's also about having a really great template to help us. So let me show you my one. It's available for a download on lightbulbmoment.info. That's our blog site. So you can go and download this template, read much more about it. But I just want to talk you through it. What you can see on the very left-hand side are the slides. Now, I put slide pictures in. I used to use slide numbers when I was working for other organisations, and probably like me, you've had those times where you've added a slide and suddenly slide 13 becomes slide 14, slide 15 becomes slide 16, and you've got to go and change that for 20, 30, 50 slides. I've done that more times than I care to remember, and I'm not doing it anymore. Also, having the visual there, it's just really quick. It's really easy for me to know what is coming next. It helps me in my delivery. I've then got the facilitator column. Now, this is where I spend most of my focus in a live online session. You can see some of it is kind of scripted. It's also got then in red the question. There's also a producer column. So when I'm working with a producer, it's brilliant to give them notes such as, please post this in chat to help out the learners. Or it could be, go and load this poll, or go and get a breakout ready, or whatever it might be. But even if you don't have a producer, this column is really useful. Did I need to load a poll? Did I need to change a layout in Adobe Connect? Whatever it might be. In that next column, it's got the technical stuff. You then have things like chat there, and further down, you've got the hand up and the microphone icons. These are just screen grabs of what's going on in the session. Because what I don't want to do is heavily script out all of my questions. We then get onto the time on slide and the elapsed time. And some people will look at this, and if you're used to sort of setting out your sessions in terms of mornings and afternoons, or an hour here, hour and a half there, you might look at this and think, really, Joe, you've put 30 seconds down for a slide? Is that not just a bit OCD? Is that not a bit detailed? And yeah, maybe it is for some people. The reason I do it this way is it helps me in a number of different ways. One, obviously the total timing of the session. And the more I've done this, the better I've got at getting the timing estimate within tolerance and pretty good. Also, it really helps me and my producer and other trainers that are using my materials to know whether something like that, a 30-second slide is like, this is just a new topic, this is just a segue between two things, or whether, for instance, 4 minutes is a bit more of a discussion. We get more people involved and we want to spend more time discussing whatever that question is. I do not stick religiously to this timing. But it gives me an indication. If at the end of this page, this section, I'm at 16 or 17 minutes into the session, I'm fine with that. If I'm at 21 minutes into the session, I might be thinking, am I spending too much time? Am I not concentrating enough? But it's up to me as a facilitator to know what to do and to have that flexibility. But what is it you could take from this idea and think, actually, I really like this for my live online sessions. I'm going to adopt this idea and do something differently. We then need to start thinking about, well, how is this going to work in a virtual classroom, which is where I want to bring digital body language in. Now, Steve Woods is the Chief Technical Officer at Nudge, and he developed the term digital body language back in 2009 for marketing and sales. He explains that it's the aggregate of all digital activity. But the key here is it's the aggregate of the digital activity for an individual. It's not about Google Analytics you see across your whole website. It's about what one person is clicking and what one person is doing. Now, we mentioned these different tools earlier on, or different ways of facilitating in a live online classroom. And when we think about why we use these tools, it falls into some general different categories. So it's about getting to know our learners, getting to know people. We need feedback about what it is they're learning to tailor what we're doing, as well as keeping people present in the virtual classroom. And we can use this digital body language as part of a model or a theme for this as well. There's another level for these interactions, which is the key to being really effective as a virtual facilitator. And that's about using these interactions in place of our face-to-face facilitation techniques. The way to think about this is to deconstruct what you normally do face-to-face and then rebuild it in a virtual environment. So let's take an idea. Face to face, I might look around the room for people's reactions. Is someone leaning forward? Are they listening intently? Does somebody have that frown that I decide is actually confusion and maybe needs some more explanation? Is somebody frantically writing notes and maybe I need to slow down a bit? And so on. All sorts of different things that we do all the time as part of our facilitation. Live online in our virtual classroom, we can't do that because we can't see them. They might have webcams on, and I'll come back to that point in a moment, but let's assume we have no webcams for a moment. So instead, we have to do something different. So live online, I might start with that closed question of using the agree, disagree icons available to me to get a sense from people. It's my version of looking around the room. If I say, have you had experience of this, or do you know about this, or whatever it might be, that's me looking around and kind of seeing whether people are generally kind of nodding and smiling, or whether people are generally kind of frowning and have never heard of something. After that, it's about using other tools to get more and more information from people, such as chat or poll or the whiteboard, or maybe getting people to unmute. All of this replaces what I'm missing out on in that physical body language. This is really about understanding our craft face to face, so that we use those tools available to us. We then design and facilitate live online, and this is that digital body language, because we're using green ticks and chat room and stamp tools and text tools and all of these things in place of interpreting people's physical body language. Where we can't look around the room and interpret their physical responses, we can use things like, is somebody always first or last on the green tick? Is there somebody who's always last in the chat window? Is there somebody who's always got the one word answer or got the long verbose paragraph? What do those things mean and what can we interpret from them? I wanted to come back to this idea of the webcam because with digital body language, we might be thinking, well, it's okay because my attendees are going to have their webcams on so I can see them. And that can be really brilliant. I do love my attendees having their webcam on because when I say something hopefully funny rather than wrong, you do get to see people smile or nod, or those little things where people go, yeah. And you get to see those little light bulb moments going off, and I really do appreciate it. And you probably like that too. And with the webcam on, and probably a lot of us have found this in 2020, we can feel much more connected with people. We get a sense of what they're like and what's going on for them and where they are and, you know, what have they done with their hair today? What kind of scarf are they wearing? What tie have they got on? All sorts of things can actually bring conversation together and make a more human connection. It normalizes things and it gives us a little bit more of what we're accustomed to. All brilliant. There are two caveats to this. One is bandwidth issues. So if for some reason you're on dodgy home Wi-Fi or whatever it might be, you might need to be turning that video off so that you can hear what's going on, which is far more important. Also, what you might need to be aware of is that for some people, there can be really personal reasons why they don't want to or can't put their webcam on. And that could be anything from, you know what, I've had a hard day, I've got no makeup on, my hair's a mess, and I just do not want to share that with you. Or it could be through to actually, I'm in an environment that's not very positive, and that's something that I can't share with you. And we really have to respect that. I know a lot of organisations, people, facilitators, teachers are trying to insist people have their webcams on. And I would really like you to invite and encourage that ahead of time so people know, but actually not insist on it. And this is why this digital body language is so important, because we need to make sure that we can get feedback, we can get people involved, we can learn from them and get a connection with them without relying on that webcam. That's an amazing bonus if we have it. This is pretty much everything that I want to deliver for you. So I really want you to have a little bit of a reflection today about what your light bulb moment is from the session. Like I say, I'm really sorry I couldn't be with you live. I would have absolutely loved to have been, because I'm sure you're having great conversation and sharing amazing stuff in the chat that I can't see and I can't incorporate and I can't tailor to what you've said or what you've asked. So I'm really sorry I can't do that, but I do hope that I've managed to bring in some of the things that people have said in other sessions and the kind of things that are valuable and useful to you, and that you've had a great conversation nonetheless. So I hope you're sharing a little bit about what have you learned new or fresh, or what have you relearned today, what have you observed, what have you learned from maybe somebody in the chat window, for example. If you want to get in touch, you can on our website, lightbulbmoment.online. We've got our community website, which is free for any questions that you might want to pose, lightbulbmoment.community. And we have our blog, lightbulbmoment.info. You can contact me on Twitter at lightbulbjoe. The person you haven't met today, who's mentioned on this slide, is Mike. He's the business operations manager at Lightbulb Moment. He's normally my producer on live sessions, and for some weird sins that we have, he's my brother and we've decided to go into business together. But you can contact us on Twitter or email anytime. Thank you once again for asking me to speak to you today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.